Jason Alexander is starring in the upcoming comedy Out of Office about a character whose boss is dealing with a complicated marriage. This sounds like a great role for the actor who became famous for playing George Costanza on Seinfeld, as George's work life is definitely complicated. Whether at work or hanging out with his good friend Jerry Seinfeld, George makes some decisions that aren't very intelligent and only make him more unhappy and stressed out. George listens to his impulses and gut instincts, but most of the time, he should slow down and think before he acts. George wants to eat and watch TV while having sex. Season 9's The Blood is one of the best Seinfeld episodes about George, but it's definitely not one of his smartest ideas. George wants to have sex with his girlfriend while eating a sandwich and also having the TV on. Not everyone agrees with him about this. This decision isn't as meaningful as some others, but it does have a huge impact on George's love life. While some people like his ideas, others find it upsetting. George can't assume that everyone he dates will like this. George double dips at a party. George upsets some partygoers in the season 4 episode The Implant when he double dips. This is one of George's most well-known actions, as fans love referencing this moment whenever they're sharing food or attending a gathering. George doesn't see a problem with the way that he's eating, but of course, this isn't very polite or sanitary. While this behavior isn't something that George does all the time since he only occasionally attends parties, he still should work on this bad habit. George acts the opposite way that he usually would. The season 5 episode The Opposite is unforgettable, as George acts the opposite way that his natural instincts tell him to. This works out at first, as he asks someone out and seems to be doing well. Eventually, though, pretending to be someone else will backfire on George, as he needs to be proud of who he is and embrace his true nature instead of lying or making things up. George has many positive qualities that he should focus on instead, like his intelligence and ability to talk about any possible topic. George eats a pastry from the garbage in season 6. George is embarrassed when he's found eating an eclair that was put in the garbage. But while he does regret this decision, that doesn't stop him from doing it in the first place or thinking that this is a smart idea. This may be one of George's funniest Seinfeld storylines, but it's still an awkward choice for him to make. If he continued to eat out of the garbage in front of his parents, friends, love interests, or co-workers, or even his bosses, this could be a problem for him. George returns to work like he never resigned. George doesn't seem to respect the people who he works for throughout Seinfeld, as he often makes up his mind about what he should do instead of talking to his manager. In season 2, George is mad that he can't use a fancy washroom at work, and he resigns. But then he wants to keep working there and returns, hoping that no one will notice. George never thinks that he will be found out, and while viewers know that he will never stop scheming, this is still one of his worst choices. George needs to take responsibility for his actions and find more confidence in his decisions. George doesn't answer his girlfriend's calls. George makes another silly choice in the season 8 episode The Susie when he assumes that his girlfriend wants to end their relationship, and instead of just being honest or talking to her about it, he stops answering the phone. George often comes up with explanations for his behavior that make perfect sense to him, and he thinks it's logical to stop talking to someone so they can't say something upsetting. But at the end of the day, George needs to face this problem instead. George insults Patrice when he breaks up with her. George has several girlfriends on Seinfeld and the relationships all end poorly. In the season 3 episode The Truth, Patrice asks George why he's ending their romance, and he calls her pretentious. George shouldn't be so pleased with himself for using brutal honesty, as this is the wrong way to go here. While George doesn't talk to Patrice Anyamre and seems to forget about the situation, which proves that it doesn't impact his life very much, it's still a mean and harsh thing to do. George should never be quite this honest. George wants to have a fun summer with no work. In the season 8 episode The Summer of George, the beloved character decides that he doesn't need to have a job for a few months. George wants to have an entertaining, great summer season where he doesn't have to worry about responsibilities or dealing with any stress at all. Although George is proud of himself for coming up with this plan, it's not the most practical, and it's definitely not mature or adult. George would be better off realizing that work is part of life and finding a career that he loves. George assumes he was given a job. George's many jobs on Seinfeld cause him a lot of pain and suffering, as he doesn't do well with authority, responsibility or bosses. In the season 5 episode The Barber, George has a job interview and doesn't know if he was really hired but moves forward as if he was given the position. This might make sense to George and feel like a practical idea, since he needs to make a living. But this is one of George's silliest decisions. He should wait and talk to the person who interviewed him and ask if he was hired, or at the very least, phone the office before coming in and acting like he belongs there. George uses a cane to work at Play Now. In the season 9 episode The Butter Shave, George makes his dumbest decision yet. He gets a job at Play Now, and since his employer noticed him using a cane, he says that he has a handicap. This is a terrible idea that doesn't bother George, as he makes many choices like this throughout the sitcom's seasons. It's clear from the start of this storyline that it won't work out for George, as lying is never a good idea, especially not in the workplace. George gets swept up in his lie and doesn't stay at the job for very long. If George would tell the truth, he would definitely have a better time in his working life.